First, I'd say welcome to everyone. My name's Julia Nielsen. I'm the Deputy Director of Trade and Agriculture here at the OECD. Let me first begin by some housekeeping matters, and then I'll turn to a few opening remarks. So by way of housekeeping, just to inform you, make sure you all know that the event is being recorded. We also have a number of people joining us online, and just a reminder to those joining online that you can submit questions into the chat if you want, and there'll be opportunities for discussions later. So look, with that, it's my great pleasure to host you here at the OECD on this very important topic, where I feel a little, this is an important technical side event to the School Meals Coalition that's been opened by President Macron this week, and the OECD is a knowledge partner. I feel a little bit humbled. I'm sitting in a room full of experts. I'm not an expert, and I'm looking forward to listening and learning this morning. I did in a previous life spend quite a long time working in the development field, and I did see firsthand the extraordinary importance of school meal programs and the difference that they can make. So as you know, this coalition from coming out of the UN Food System Summit has been seen as one of the real success stories coming out of that summit in terms of driving action to improve and scale up school nutrition and meals programs to ensure that every child has an opportunity to receive healthy, nutritious meals by 2030. And this is so critical. It's so critical to avoid the lifelong tragedy for individuals of childhood malnutrition. It's incredibly important for countries in terms of their future and their economic future to invest in the next generation. And it's also critical from the point of view of food systems transformation and what we like to call the triple challenge facing food systems, which is to provide affordable, nutritious food for a growing world population, to provide for livelihoods all along the food chain, and to do so in a sustainable way and that reduces the sector's climate change footprint. So all of that is an ambitious agenda, and it's a shared agenda across all countries. And what we saw in COVID-19 was just how important school meal programs were in providing vulnerable children across all countries with nutritious meals, but also the spillover effects and how much that also supported not just those children, but their families and the wider communities. So what our contribution has been as the OECD is looking to contribute to the evidence arm, the Research Consortium that we see today. And we're delighted to have a number of members of the Research Consortium around the table. So our first contribution was in February in 2022, where we held a webinar on making better policies for school meals. And as with all our work, this was focused on policy coherence and trying to bring a multidisciplinary approach. What we've done in trade and agriculture is look primarily at OECD countries, so that's a different set of experiences, that looks across food insecurity and food assistance programs in those countries and the role of that in assisting the triple challenge. Like others around this room, I guess, it's no secret to you to say that this research really underscores that school meal programs are so much more than just meals provided at school. And they do an awful lot of important goals. Obviously, they contribute to food insecurity. That's, absolutely fundamental. They can also contribute to healthier food habits. And perhaps that's something that's particularly of concern in the countries that we work with, in OECD countries, where we're seeing a high prevalence of obese and overweight children. But this is also an equity issue because this is primarily a problem, especially for children from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So that as well as being important issues of equity across countries, there's important issues of equity within countries as well. As I mentioned before, this is also part of the triple challenge. So there's important connections to livelihoods, notably in, I think, low and middle income countries where you can see connections to how you support the procurement of food being served and the procurement policies. And of course, better education outcomes. Hungry children are not able to learn. So over the last 18 months, we have been working here at the OECD, and particularly credit goes to my colleague Céline Giner, who will close today's session, working with the Good Examples community of practice of the Research Consortium, and we've been focusing on studies on the US and Japan. So with that, let me just introduce today's session, which is divided into 2 sessions. So the first panel is going to highlight the experience across 4 countries, across the United States, Ethiopia, France, and Namibia, and where we're going to have the pleasure of hearing some high-level policymakers talk about the insights into how their programs operate, and especially the role of research and how research has helped the evolution of policy challenges and how the remaining challenges to be overcome. And in the second part, we'll have a wider discussion on good policy practices and the returns on investment in school feeding programs. So look, thank you for being here. Let me, at this point, hand over to Sylvie Avalon, who is the Professor of Food Science at l'Institut Agro. And Sylvie leads, together with Heli Kusapolo, and forgive me for mispronouncing that, I'm sure I garbled it, the Good Examples community of practice. So Sylvie, I hand over to you.
Thank you so much. And we would like to thank OECD for hosting this event. After the 2 days of coalition, we wanted to go deeper in the science and policy dialogue. And we wanted to highlight how research can help in improving the program. We have in the room several researchers who are from the communities of practice. And we have also some decision and policy maker. So we would like to strengthen the dialogue between these 2 types of communities. And so the community of practice are among 6, and Donald will explain more this later. We know that science can contribute at distinct level. We can collect existing data, report, and we can see the evolution and trends. But we can also provide valuable decision-making tools, but we will see this later with a second panel. So it's really my pleasure to introduce this first session. We will have a country perspective with Ethiopia, France, and Namibia. And we have asked them to respond to several questions. We would like to know what are their main achievements, what are their challenges in their programs, and we would like also to know how do they interact with researchers in their countries. All the countries will have 10 minutes. And so let's not waste time, and we are going straight to the matter. And it's my pleasure now to introduce Johannes Wogasso. He's Director General in the Ministry of Education and in Ethiopia. So I think he's connected. So Johannes, the Zoom is yours. So you can go and share your slide, please.
Yep. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me first? Let me shoot that you can hear me. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, great. This is Johannes. I'm just from Ethiopia. I'm just working in the ministry as currently I'm Chief Executive Officer for Educational Programs and Quality Improvement. Formerly, I was a Director General, and the program was, upgraded into the executive level. So now I'm just working as Chief Executive Officer. I'm here just to present about Ethiopian school feeding program, especially our practices, challenge, and also the importance of research just to improve a school feeding program. Sorry, what? Next, please. Next. Just to save the time, go to the next slide. Go to the next slide. Next, go ahead. Next. Yeah. Just, I would like to give some facts and a figure about Ethiopian education as well as school feeding program. Next, please. now the pre-prime, the primary and the pre-primary education accommodate more than 22 million children in the system. Though the figure is very large, still the dropout and the out of school children is very large. For this age group, nearly 4.2 million children were estimated to be out of school from the system. Next, please. Next. Yeah, next. Yeah. So currently the Ministry of Education, in collaboration with a development partner, uh, around 6 million children were benefited from the school feeding program. And this program consumed from the government budget alone, around 83.5 million budget was consumed for this program. Or, the government is allocated this much money for the school feeding program. Next, please. And among those 6 million children, next, among these 6.2 million children, around 800,000 were supported by the development partner, of which World Food Program share almost around 438,991 children were benefited from the World Food Program school feeding program. And the other partners like Save the Children and the other local NGOs also working on the school feeding program, and they are using, they are serving for 300,000 children. Next, please. Just to give a bit insight about the timeline of Ethiopian school feeding program, it was started 3 decades ago in 1994, and the first program was introduced by providing hot meals. And next to that, of course, after 8 years, the dropout rate for girls were very high. So World Food Program introduced the take home for girls, and this program especially operated in the pastoralist and hard to reach areas. And in 2002, we started this program. And after 10 years again, with the support of WFP, we launched homegrown school feeding program. Of course, the program was piloted in one region, and after 3 years in 2015, we escalated this program into the other regions too. Fortunately, of course, in 2015, there was a large drought was happened in the country, and that causes for more than 4 million children to be dropped out from the school. And the reason why I said fortunately, because the government realized the importance of school feeding program by the government was started in that year. And in order to bring back those 4 million dropped out children, the government, with the experience we collected from the homegrown school feeding program, launched government initiated homegrown school feeding program. And on that year, more than 2.9 million children were benefited by using homegrown school feeding program. And after 4 years in 2019, the government again recognized and realized the importance of school feeding program, not only for the education sector as well as for economic sector, because the many cooperative were very much motivated and improved their production, because homegrown basically promote the procurement of foods from their local farmers. So those local farmers were very much benefited. And some regions, especially the Addis Ababa city administration, launched the universal school feeding program at the city level. And in 2019, this program was started. And since then, where this program is scaled into all regions. Just to make it systematized, in 2021 we introduced the national school feeding policy framework, which promote progressive universalization. That means till 2030, this policy framework promote till 2030 every child, pre-primary and primary school children expected to benefit at least one meal per day. To complement with this policy framework, the ministry also developed a 10-year coastal school feeding strategy. And before last year, more than 4.8 million children were benefited from the school feeding program. And last year, around 6.2 million children were benefited. And this year, we expect around 9 million children will be benefited from the school feeding program. Next, please. Yeah, next. This is a repeated slide. Next, please. Next. Yeah. So just to give a bit of information about the government priorities in this regard, in our plan, our goal is because the school feeding policy framework promote that progressive universalization of school feeding program. So 2030, our goal is to reach that all pre-primary and the primary school children will get at least 1 meal per day. And this year, 2023, we have a plan to address 9.5 million children. The strategy we set for this is just to promote school garden, to enhance diverse school meal, and to get fresh food, as well as to motivate local communities. And the other things which we experience a challenge in those years is the infrastructure. And since last year, we worked hard to expand the school feeding infrastructure, at least to have school meal hall in every school. The third strategy we said is this school feeding program. It needs resource. So the strategy we set in this regard is local resource mobilization plan, and one region alone mobilized around 9 billion Ethiopian birr from the community. So this is one of the strategy we set to reach to 33 million pre-primary and the primary school children. The other things is evidence. So the strategy we set here is to put in place many different evidence generation mechanism, and strengthening our monitoring and evaluation system. And the other strategy we said is just to develop some sort of different standards and protocols for food safety. Next, please. That next. Yeah, the lesson we have learned so far is one of the things is we established the governance system, and that governance system promote every region to apply a school feeding program, and to deploy a budget from the government treasury. So one of the things we consider as a good lesson is we have a policy framework, and we have also a strategy to implement the policy framework, and the others we have developed different standard and protocols for school feeding program. The other good practice is this program is not only helping the education sector, it have its strong impact on the other sectors too. Therefore, it should be managed by different structure. Either it's complemented in the education sector or separately. It should be managed by its own structure. So in this regard, at the ministry, we have a school feeding directorate. Even some regions like Addis Ababa City Administration, they have separate structure. They call it a school feeding agency. So this agency is not tied with Education Bureau, but separately manage this school feeding program. The other things we have observed as a good lesson is local procurement strategies. This local procurement and homegrown school feeding program have strong impact and the potential to motivate local farmers to improve their productivity. And the other is because school feeding, homegrown school feeding program also allow to include fresh food for children. And school gardening helps us not only to provide some fresh food for children, but also children will acquire some skills to produce, to cultivate some plants in the school area. Children exercising some sort of skill. So this might consider as a good practices, community participation and the commitment, because significant percentage share of the budget comes from the community, though the government is allocating some budget. The government, of course, realized the importance of school feeding program, so allocating separate budget for this school feeding program. Next, please. Yeah, this is simply just to give to give some insight about the fresh food. The orange, banana, these all are from the local. So children receiving fresh foods. Fresh foods have a strong nutritional content. Next, please. Yeah, this is how the food value chain, especially it is one of our region have a good practices on homegrown school feeding program. This is simply a theory of change for market assessment. Next, please.
Johannes, maybe you are going to conclude because we have to go
Yep.
to the next speaker, please.
Yeah, yeah. My last slide is about the importance of research. In this regard, research have strong impact for assessing the program effectiveness. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah, the other is this. The research helps us to identify best strategies and identify also nutritional needs to develop appropriate menus for children. And the other things, which is the most important, is every program should be supported by research to ensure that the program is sustainable. Finally, last slide, please. Finally, the challenge we are experiencing is there is high demand of school feeding because of as you might heard about the conflict in my country and the recurrent budget, the recurrent drought happening in the country. The school feeding program, especially in the emergency area, we have high demand. And the quality of school feeding program, even though we are implementing universalization in Addis Ababa City administration, is still the nutrition diversity is still the challenge. That's why research, complement to alleviate this problem. Shortage of budget, limited resource, and the private sector so far their engagement is very little, and that might also hinder us to reach to many children. The other is food price escalation. I think this is a global challenge, but here in the developing world, especially in Ethiopia, this create many problem to expand a school feeding program. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Johannes, for this very global overview. So keep your question if you have some, and we will have an open discussion at the end. So we move directly to the next speaker. So I give the floor now to Erwan de Gavel. You are the head of the food policy unit of the Ministry of Agriculture and Food Sovereignty in France. So could you tell us a little more about the French experience, please?
Of course. Thank you, Mrs. Chair. As you said, I'm Erwan de Gavel, the head of the Food Policy Office. I will talk today about the how do we do our program in France, and then the role of research and the main challenges. So next slide, please. I can do it myself. Great. Okay. So next slide, please. So in France, we have around 80,000 mass catering restaurants representing around 4 billion meals served each year. And the school meals represent around 40% of all these meals. The responsible for school meals are the collectivities. For primary school, it's municipalities in France, and for middle school and high school, counties and regions. And we have a lot of organizations possible, depending on the type of management, with direct operation and contract catering. And depending on the organization, we can have kitchens with on-site preparation and service, or another possibility is a central kitchen and satellites. Next slide, please. So the policy in France has been developing since the early 2000. The first policies were related to food safety, with safety the crisis in the beginning of these years. And then in the early 2000 And then there was a policy about nutrition, because there have been assessment that the nutrition quality of food meals was kind of bad at this time. So there have been laws and decrees to edict rules of serving frequencies in school meals. And so that was 2010. And since 2014, it's another area of policies which have been developed with sustainable catering for everyone. And I will develop it in the next slide, please. So there are different areas of policies. The first is about the sustainability and quality of food supply, with an obligation since January the 1st of 2022 to have 50% of sustainable and quality foodstuff, and including 20% of organic products. So the results of the year 2021, so before the obligation, in primary schools are actually quite good, because we are at 44% of sustainable and quality products and 23% of organic for those who responded. And for middle and high school, the results are quite good, with 24% of sustainable and quality products and 30% organic. So the second area is nutrition, with policies on the diversification of protein sources. And since 2019, the obligation to have one vegetarian meal every week for all the school meals. And as I told, since 2011, a lot of rules for the nutritional quality of foodstuff. The third area is about food education, which is mandatory in the school curriculum. We developed a lot of tools for teachers, and a lot of tools available. And the area of fight against food waste is really important for us. We benefit from the European program Milk and Fruits in School, which allows all the state members of EU to distribute fruits and milk during school meals or in the morning or the afternoon. And the last area is about social accessibility, and we have two main measures. The first is free breakfast at school for children that don't have breakfast in the morning. And the second one is social pricing, with the state helps the little municipalities, rural municipalities, to introduce social pricing. And for each meal at less than €1, the state give €3. And from January the 1st, 2024, it will be €4 to help them also buy more sustainable and quality products and organic. Next slide, please. There are a bit of challenges, of course, like for every restaurant, there are subjects of budget, of available funds, but we have a lot of levers of action. Of course, the fight against food waste, diversification of protein sources, revision of menus with taking care of seasonality, the optimization of food making, supply optimization, and pricing optimization. And of course, the challenge of guest acceptance, in which case we do a lot of information for the guest and food education. And we have a tool which I will describe earlier after, which is a My Canteen platform, the territorial food program, which we are developing in all the country, with the aim to execute a systemic action plan on the territory, and the national strategy against poverty. Next slide, please. Then I will give you an example, and we have others, of how science shapes our policies. And this example in the next slide is about, it was supposed to be hidden. No, it's okay, it's okay. So for nutritional recommendations, we have a 3 steps process. So the first step is with our agency of risk assessment that provides a scientific basis for updating the dietary guidelines. Then we have a council, so the High Council of Public Health, that defines the new consumption guidelines based on the ANSES analysis. And finally, an agency which is called Santé Publique France, which is responsible for updating the wording and developing the messages and communication campaigns to make sure the messages are understood by everyone. So this is a major frame for nutritional recommendations, and specifically for school meals, we have rules, as I said in the next slide. So in 2011, there was this decree setting rules for frequency. For example, one first meal out of 2 have to be vegetables. You have to have fish once a week and a vegetarian menu once a week. This decree has been assessed first by a research team of INRAE, which assessed that it was really effective to improve the nutritional quality of school meals. And then in 2021, with 2014 and 2015 data from ANSES, and the assessment was also really good and showed that it helped improve nutritional quality of foods. However, there have been new recommendations, for example, focused on pulses and whole grains. So this decree had to be updated, and we really scientific reports and scientific expertise really helped us in this exercise with 2 reports of ANSES related to vegetarian menus, and of course the consumption guidelines for children by the High Council of Public Health. So we worked with all the stakeholders on this scientific basis to an evolution of the rules, and we hope to have these new rules at the end of the year. But before publishing the rules, we wanted to make sure we didn't make mistakes and to make sure the science was validating it. So we will be assessing the new rules with our food safety agency. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So one example of a good practice we'd like to share is the development of a numeric platform to help restaurants and restaurant owners to achieve all the goals. So it has a lot of information, a lot of tools, and it's also the platform in which you declare the percentage of sustainable and quality foods and organic foods in your restaurant in order for us to monitor nationally all this. And next slide, please. And the last slide, it's more of a perspective. So we are now drawing up the future national strategy for food, nutrition and climate, which will be published in the beginning of next year, to define a roadmap for all the food and nutrition policy up to 2030, to integrate all the, in a systemic way, all the sustainable areas like agriculture, social environment and health issues, and of course, including relating to school meals. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's really interesting to see how you have exchanged with researchers at distinct steps of the process of building policies. So now we are moving to the last speaker in Namibia. So I'm happy to welcome Heda Bon. She is the Deputy Executive Director for the Department of Formal Education of School and Ministry of Education. So Heda, I think you're online. The Zoom is yours. You have 10 minutes, please, to share your experience.
Thank you so much. Yes, let's dive into it. Let's go to the next slide. My overview is just a little bit of national context. Then, of course, how the feeding program is structured, our achievements, a little bit of detail, our new initiatives, the challenges and opportunities, and how we plan to go ahead. In Namibia, we have only 2.3 million people, of who 66% is below the age of 30. We have a learner population below 1 million. It is only 864,632 as per current Education Management Information System statistics. Now, we are very fortunate that the national budget allocation to education, you see the purple bar, the first one is the highest, 22% comes to education. There's also a Ministry of Higher Education gets 5%. If you add that, we are very close to 30% goes into education. Health and social services, as well as gender inequality, poverty eradication, are also colored here to stick out for us to visualize the investment into the social sector. Now, next slide. In Namibia, the school feeding program is instituted since 1990. By that time, it was piloted by the World Food Program for only about 70,000 learners. In 1996, it was taken over by government through the Ministry of Education, Arts and Culture, and it was fully funded by an appropriate budget. The procurement was done through national bulk procurement. In 2012, we had a major research done together with the World Food Program on the Namibia school feeding program and its characteristics. This was then extended into an evaluation in 2019, and through that process, for the first time then, we published our Namibia school feeding program policy. That was ratified by Cabinet, and it had also an implementation plan that matures this year and is up for review. So as of 2021, we are busy engaged with the with the World Food Program to establish a homegrown school feeding through a pilot, and this is ongoing. Let's continue. Now, the beneficiaries, next slide. The beneficiaries in Namibia, if you look at the learner population by the pie chart, you see it's close to 75% in primary. That's pre-primary, junior primary, and senior primary. The pink, yellow, and orange. This is taking up about 77 or so percent of the entire learner population. Of these, 75% are benefiting. These are over 460,000 learners benefit from the Namibia school feeding program in 1,532 schools at an annual budget of 130 million Namibia dollars. That is only a 6.8 million US dollars, and it translates in our currency to $1.44 per day per meal. So we see the school feeding program as an essential safety net to ensure access to education. It really attracts learners to school because often at times it's the only meal for the learner per day. So what is happening? So the aims are to, next slide, yes, we are finding to improve learner retention and throughput. We also say survival rate. Now, what is it actually? It's a maize blend meal where 63% is maize and 25% is plant-based proteins, usually soya, 11% sugar, and 1% salt. It is centrally procured through big tenders, and the distribution only from regional centers to the schools is decentralized. Now, the home diversification to establish homegrown school feeding is ongoing, currently only happening in 29, next slide, in 29 schools and benefiting only 13,915 learners. But we see the value in it being a multi-sectoral model that gives a diversified, nutritious food, as we have seen from the colleagues also. Fresh produce enriches the nutrition. It is also decentralized. It has a more regional and customized menus. And we have 88 individuals being trained to be capacitated to implement it in order to stimulate the agricultural production and boost the economy, reduce poverty, and create employment as well as income for vulnerable and disadvantaged community. Next slide. So the challenges here, and of course, every challenge is presenting itself also with an opportunity, is yes, we need further research. We are engaged with the World Food Programme, how to best expand and diversify. You have seen the majority of learners benefiting are actually in primary, pre-primary and primary. There's a need to expand, but a challenge to both sides, secondary as well as ECD. The challenges are mainly with funding and water and sanitation, proper food storage, cooking shelters, and a sustainable energy supply. The majority of these meals are cooked on open fire. So the cooking is done by volunteers, and so the monetary incentive is also a challenge because, of course, it demands more financial resources. The further challenge is an improved coordination and supervision of the entire supply chain, because the researchers that we have conducted together with the World Food Programme have identified, the gaps in supply chain that do then undermine the food quality as well as the food safety. So the systematic quality assurance of the commodity and the fresh produce is an ongoing process that needs to be strengthened. And we also developed a Namibia School Feeding Information System, NASIS, through assistance from the World Food Programme. And it's now, we are now in the stage of utilizing it. And it's, of course, also the optimal utilization that can make a difference, the data management, and then to use the data by the principle data must speak to further inform policy development, policy review, and decision making. Apart from all of these challenges, Namibia is also very vulnerable to calamities, namely drought, as well as certain areas in the country are experiencing flood. So these are in summary. But what we also need to recognize is, though we have these pocketed interventions that speak of great success in terms of homegrown school feeding as well as school gardens, I haven't emphasized yet. So these initiatives are supported by other, local entities, or also organizations such as the Agricultural Forum and local organizations that have adopted one school garden per region per annum to finance, the fencing, water supply, and so on. So next slide, and that brings me to the end of my presentation. Just one before. Okay. Is that the Namibia School Feeding Programme is highly ranked and is receiving a priority. It remains an integral part from the Namibian for the Namibian education system. It is seen as a priority and recognized that learners need to have a nutritious meal to eliminate short-term hunger, to improve equity and quality learning outcomes. The homegrown school feeding program and the school gardens promote, of course, improved quality of meals through diversified nutrition. We also, through this process, encourage fruit production at household level and community level to have the desired economic impact. Now, in relation to the illustration here on integrated early childhood development, currently in Namibia, ECD is implemented jointly across the various ministries, the Ministry of Education, Arts and Culture, Gender Equality, Child Welfare, there is Health and Social Services, but also Home Affairs and Immigration, Safety and Security. The last slide you see there is an initiative by Safety and Security. In fact, the Namibia Correctional Services are altogether food self-sufficient. And this best practice and lesson for the entire country is now going to be utilized to expand to the ECD centers, the registered ECD centers, to provide them with then fortified instant porridge, which is also research based on the best mix of which maize, which beans, and which, best ratio. And there is continuous dialogue between these government institutions. This also improves the challenges experienced through these open national bidding regarding the bulk procurement. So we are looking forward to this rollout to ECD centers by an instant porridge, using an instant porridge for the little ones, and this is all supported through EU funding as well. We, of course, desire to further improve food quality and food security through these initiatives that we have mapped out for ourselves, and we continue to collaborate, of course, with World Food Programme and UNICEF to introduce alternative ways how to produce, and hydroponics is one of them. And this is also piloted in 3 schools and well established amongst the Namibia Correctional Services as well. So with these few words, I close my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eda, for this very clear presentation. So again, if you have a question, keep them. We will have an open discussion at the end. And in the audience, if you want to be in contact with the speaker, you will have all their details. You can also ask more details about their programs later on. So now we are moving to the session 2, will be chaired by Donald Bundy. He is the director of a research consortium on school health and nutrition. He's also professor of epidemiology in London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. So Don, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Sylvie, for that. And thank you very much to the previous speakers for their really interesting contributions. It's a fantastic insight that we're getting here. As Julia said, we're doing this at the end of a meeting of the Coalition for School Meals, the School Meals Coalition, which started the week with 90 countries and ended the week with 99, I think is the current total. So it's really a remarkable and exciting moment in this process. That whole coalition is a result of COVID. It's a whole reaction by countries to discovering what happens if you close your schools. You don't just lose all your education, you also lose all the support for the well-being of children. So that's, I think, been very important. And this research consortium is an initiative that was created by that coalition. We're not a freestanding entity. And although we're called research, what we really are is collating the evidence and developing the guidance. And of course, we're not doing that ourselves. We're doing that through and with other organizations. So it's brilliant that we're working with OECD on this. I have to say this is a real change, a real positive step forward. I'm just going to say that my first half of my career was as an academic. I was a professor at Oxford University, but the second half of my career I was at the World Bank. So I have to say that the methods and approaches of OECD seem very familiar to me in many ways. So I'm deeply grateful for this connection. why do we think leadership OECD is really important? We see as we work with this coalition, these are countries across all income groups. Very unusual, actually, when we work on development issues. So we're seeing all countries participating in all income levels participating in this, and we see a real leadership role for OECD because there's. Well, first, let me say I'm delighted, Julia, that you're from trade and agriculture, because I think that the seriousness of that approach is very important to this discussion around school food. School food is a $48 billion a year industry, more than 80% of which is paid for by domestic funds from governments. So it's really this is a serious business which underlies all of the work we do. So I want to just highlight a couple of things that OECD we think would be very important for us in terms of data. The data that and we've already seen that this morning. I think that the work you do with your countries is data rich. And that's not true for all of the countries we work with. So that's a really important part of this. And secondly, in terms of policy, we can see some exemplary policies here backed up by the kind of evidence that we often lack from low-income countries. So this is also, I think, a very important role. We've just been writing a white paper on the issues of food systems and climate and food sovereignty and so on. I think that's another area we could perhaps work much more closely together on. So that's just by way of preamble. What I'm now going to do is turn to to some of our strong participants here to react to to what we've heard from the countries. And we're going to start off by hearing from Diane de Bernardo from the USDA Foreign Agricultural Services in the United States, and give us some idea about how what you've heard influences your work on international food assistance through the McGovern-Dole program in particular.
So I first wanted to thank all the first round of presenters for their excellent presentations. And what really struck me in particular was the strength of both the Ethiopian and Namibian programs in Africa. And the reason that really struck me is the program I work on has a very, very heavy presence in Africa. And I feel that with the coalition, especially with the peer-to-peer network and the regional convenings that just happened, that a lot of these lessons could be shared with other countries that we support and beyond. And also with the lessons we learned from France, I think even though it's a high income country with many more resources, I do think a lot of lessons apply with menu planning and so forth, and use of the resources that are available and so on. But what I thought I would actually do, and I hope you don't mind, Professor Bundy, is that I actually wanted to introduce you to the McGovern-Dole program and how it works. And to be honest, some of the challenges we face in both developing and adopting best practices and how it's affected our ability to understand nutritional impact and so on. And I also, my phone just went out. I also wanted to apologize. Some of my slides are still a little outdated. I just really didn't have time to update before today. So I will read for some notes on where that those updates happen. But the McGovern-Dole International Food for Education and Child Nutrition Program is the world's largest international school feeding program. It actually was initiated in 2002, but launched in 2003. So it's only been operational for 2 decades. And I would actually argue that's still a relatively new program with a lot of lessons still being fleshed out. Let me also explain the structure of the program. It is a commodities-based program, so it delivers in-kind food aid as well as financial and technical assistance. For the last 2 years, it has had an annual appropriation of $230 million. And I left up here the amount of commodities from 2021. I was not able to get 2022, but 50,900 metric tons of commodities were shipped to different McGovern-Dole countries in 2021. And I think that's probably roughly what we've had this year. And then on the next slide, you can see that this also needs to be updated a little bit, but it shows you just the coverage that we have around the world. We work, again, primarily in Africa, but also Latin America, and the Caribbean, and Asia. And currently, we have, over the past 2 decades, we have worked in 48 countries, serving 31 million children and families and providing 5.5 billion school meals. Currently, there are 48 active projects in 33 countries, and 27 of those countries are in Africa. So again, just the heavy emphasis we have on Africa. And the way it works is every year we put out a solicitation called a Notice of Funding Opportunity, or a NOFO, and we invite applicants to apply for funding. And those are the World Food Program and the Food and Agriculture Organization, and also NGOs. And they apply, and we have review committees, and then we select awards. And that process takes the majority of the year. It starts out with scoping missions that prioritize the countries, and then about 10 months later, we announce new awards. Currently, we're still negotiating some of those awards, and those awards will be in Cameroon, Haiti, Mozambique, Nepal, Nicaragua, Sri Lanka, and Togo. And I think just about all of them have been announced on the USDA website at this point, all but maybe 1 or 2. These funds will procure commodities in the United States. The commodities are bought on the open market and then shipped to the countries. Starting in 2018, we are now allowed to use 10% of funds from project budgets to procure locally and regionally. And then the implementing partners actually always go into some sort of agreement with the host government, and then they provide direct technical support to the government and to communities. And this could be channeled through local and regional and national government agencies, parent-teacher associations, different community groups. Every country is a little different. And it's a multifaceted program. So it's both education and nutrition, but also work in the community, and there are water, sanitation, and hygiene components. Sorry, I need to get back on my phone keeps turning off. And we can go to the next slide. And I went through that. So the next slide, please. We have a nutrition component, and I kind of want to back up a little bit. So for probably the first 11 years of McGovern-Dole, nutrition was really de-emphasized. It was more like a feeding program to encourage children to attend school, and then with the hope that reducing short-term hunger would also improve attentiveness and learning in school. And it was only in around, I think it was 2011, that maybe 2012, that the nutrition framework finally got adopted. So I think nutrition is still a work in progress in McGovern-Dole, but we handle nutrition roughly like this. So the actual ration, the meal, has to have 3 components, and that could be what we ship over plus what's procured locally, or just, it depends on the country. And then it has to represent 30% of key nutrients if it's a meal, and 25% if it's a snack. And then we have nutrition education both in the schools and very often in the communities as well. Staff training, school gardens. School gardens are mostly a pedagogical tool, but they also help provide food for the schools. And then water, sanitation, and hygiene, I would argue, is a nutrition component. And then local and regional food aid procurement. And with LRP, we encourage procurement of fresh fruits and vegetables, animal source foods, biofortified crops, and also grains and legumes. So it, again, depends, but we encourage those to be nutrient dense commodities. And then the next slide is our framework, again, which was adopted relatively late in the program. And you can kind of see it's more, it's not really quite a nutrition outcome oriented framework. It's more tracking how knowledge is increased and practices are adopted. And we haven't quite figured out how to measure nutritional impact in McGovern-Dole. And that's something I would very much like us to deal with, but I'll talk about that more in a moment. And the next slide. This is an outdated slide. It's more to illustrate that these are our required indicators, and they're very, very output driven. And you can derive some rates from them, but I feel like they don't really show impact. And currently, this is really what we are able to do. And the next slide, please. This illustrates some of our evolution in more recent years. So when I came on board, I was on detail from USAID, and we were using this dietary quality indicator, the minimum acceptable diet, which was really developed for children under 2. And there was kind of a rebellion among certain of our implementers that we can't use this indicator. And we decided that year to drop it. But it left us without a way to measure dietary quality. So I agree we shouldn't have been using it. And I actually was the one who persuaded people to stop, but it left us with a gap. And then in 2021, we started introducing the possibility of having anthropometry in the schools, partly to test for feasibility, whether it would even work out at all. Would countries accept it? Would there be the bandwidth to do it, frankly? And when I discussed it among stakeholder groups, I actually had a really mixed reaction. I thought people would be very in favor of it, but some people really thought it was a bad idea. I think it's a good idea. So we're moving forward. In 2022, the current language was adopted. So this is optional, not required. And each year we've had a few more partners put that in their applications, which I'm pleased to see. Am I going too long?
Yeah, if you could wind up,
Okay.
Diane, that'd be great. You're not going too long. It's really interesting.
I will stop there.
Okay. Super. Thank you very much, Diane. It's really fascinating stuff. And I hope this is the beginning of a conversation. This is great. Can we now move on to, Marie, to Marie from the Inter-American Development Bank to give, from the Inter-American Development Bank to give a perspective on what we've heard this morning from the countries.
Sure, and thank you very much, first of all, to the OECD. Sorry, thank you. It's very interesting to hear about some of the programs specifically in Ethiopia and Namibia. And the challenges. Well, I come from a very regionally focused background, Latin America and the Caribbean, and it's nice sometimes to get the perspective, right, of other regions and to see that we do share the same challenges and the same similarities. So on that, quickly, I am challenging myself to highlight some of the best practices of Latin America and the Caribbean that haven't been spoken about intensively over the last 2 days. But to do that, I need to give you a little bit of context about Latin America and the Caribbean. As some of you may know, Latin America and the Caribbean has a very rich history of school feeding programs. Our colleague from Mexico yesterday, I believe, mentioned that Mexico has over 100 years of school feeding programs. This is a region that has tremendous experience and has had many successes. We speak often about, for example, Brazil, who has reached universal coverage for 40 million children. That's half of the amount of children in Latin America and the Caribbean that are currently receiving food. Brazil alone represents 50%. And they receive food for the whole school year, which is slightly unusual for some of the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. 80.3 million children in Latin America and the Caribbean received school feeding in 2022. That's about 55% of the school-aged population. There's still a long way to go, but 55% is to be applauded. It's a tremendous amount of children who are receiving feeding. Latin America and the Caribbean has been a leader. Chile in 2005 was the first country to push forward a regional coalition of countries to come together around school feeding in the world. In 2003, I believe, Brazil launched the Zero Hunger Initiative. In 2011, Brazil opened the Center for Excellence with support of the World Food Programme to support coordination, regional coordination, and share best practices internally from Brazil. We all know Brazil is a leader, and I will challenge myself to not only talk about Brazil in this slide, but as I said, 55% is not everyone. And in Latin America and the Caribbean, we see huge inter and intra-country disparities in school feeding. Brazil, for example, covers 100% of its children. Other countries in the Caribbean, for example, cover very few. Intra-country, you have students who are only receiving school feeding for a number of days in the school year until the budget runs out. The amount of money spent on school feeding per child per year varies greatly in Latin America and the Caribbean. In South America, for example, you can see amounts of around $260 per child per year, huge amounts, which we hope translates into quality. In other countries, it's $10 per child per year. It's very, very little. Having said all of that, there are incredible best practices. And I think because Latin America and the Caribbean has been leading school feeding initiatives really for so long, they have been able to start piloting and trying new things in recent years. And I would like to share those. So I won't talk about homegrown school feeding. I think it's been talked about enough in the last couple of days. But I would like to talk about intercultural approaches to school meals. This is a relatively new topic that we're seeing coming out of Latin America and the Caribbean, and I think it's worth mentioning. The IDB and the World Food Program in August published the State of School Feeding in Latin America and the Caribbean 2022. You can find a lot more information there, so please do check it out. But essentially, there's a chapter in there on intercultural approaches to school feeding. What we try to bring out is the importance of really decentralizing school feeding programs to implicate more Indigenous communities, Afro-descendant communities, just communities in general, right, to make decisions and to be stakeholders in their school feeding. This came out of the homegrown school feeding initiatives, right? So if we look at Brazil, for example, their laws and their policies say that 30% of school feeding, I'm already out of time, 30% of school feeding needs to be locally produced or come from Indigenous communities. What we saw was on paper that was great. In practice, especially in Indigenous communities, that was not happening. In the Amazon, for example, only 21% of communities were actually reaching this target. And so the way that that was addressed and the way that that was improved is by implicating Indigenous communities directly. The government and different stakeholders met with Indigenous community leaders. And from there, we have actually seen in Brazil that 30% being achieved in Indigenous communities. Indigenous communities is 1 million children in Brazil. This is a huge amount of children who are benefiting from this decentralization. I'll stop there. I would have liked to speak about school feeding in emergencies, but check out the publication and I'm happy to answer any questions afterwards. Thank you.
Brilliant, Maria. That's really it's really good. We're going to be suffering from time restraints all through. So as I say, I hope this is the beginning of a discussion. So we now hand over to Stéphane Verguet from Harvard School of Public Health, who is also the chair of the analytics and metrics community of practice of the Research Consortium.
Thanks very much. So what I'm going to do in the next 5 minutes is to give you some insights about how we think about the returns on investment from school meals. So next slide, please. So I have one slide and I have essentially 3 messages. The first is that we have to think multi-sectoral impact. This is a graphic here which tells you about this. It doesn't make sense otherwise. And this is really illustrative and I think only a starting point, which I think you can conceptualize at least 4 sectors. Health nutrition, my colleague from Diane was talking about this in particular with Mike Davendal. Education, of course, agriculture, social protection, and this is a starting point, but we can't look at one sector one at a time. The second thing is that means that the kinds of documentation, I would say analytics, that we need to develop need to really grasp all of this. And so if we think about investments, budget financing, the last few days, there was a lot of discussions about ministers of finance, their roles and so on. We need to really think about a comprehensive full benefit cost analysis. In other words, getting into the kinds of things that are eaten, the kinds of burdens of disease, not only through school feeding, but other things that are averted. That's very important for health and nutrition. Education, how many more people stay in school, don't drop out, enroll in school, get good grades, and so on. Agriculture, I think there's been a lot on homegrown school feeding. I won't make the case against here, but very important how the schools can be tied to local markets, and that means potentially creation of jobs. I know that my colleague in Namibia is particularly interested in this topic, how you can really try to give stable markets with fixed prices for local farmers, especially when there's occurrences of calamities and so on. Social protection, I mean, I don't have to convince you, but this is one of the biggest safety net, and this can be a non-trivial amount of money for poor families. And the second, unethical implication that goes with that is that you really need to think about quintiles, wealth quintiles, income quintiles, education quintiles, whatever distribution you want to look at things. This is absolutely essential, whether from a socioeconomic standpoint or from a subnational standpoint. I mean, we're talking about big countries that are often giving lots of autonomy regionally. That's very important, which means that in terms of your returns investment, in my view, it doesn't really make sense to have one figure of merit, but rather multiple in a disaggregated manner. And the third message I would say is that as a consequence from a political implication point of view, I think that's really a sort of useful thing, which by documenting the multisectoral impact, what you can have here is really bringing on board different stakeholders, different ministries that can really feel like some ownership about, contributing to this, and that, that deals with also perhaps budget implications. And I will just end that by doing that, I think that this is also really getting at, some of the higher levels of cabinets. This is often, anything that deals with education, often, and school feeding is one example in particular, but here we have multiple sectors. Ministers of finance, prime ministers, presidents get their attention with that, and it's really getting at the agenda on poverty reduction, and what I think in the end is like really what a nation has as a social contract. So thanks.
Brilliant. Well, that's given us. Thank you very much. I'm not managing this very well, am I? Really interesting presentation that I think really brought us together. We also now have a few minutes to actually exchange on questions. Celine is going to help on anything that comes in on the chat. But I think I just want to throw that open to the floor, so to hear if there are some reactions. Yes, please, Sophie.
Thank you for this very interesting session. I have a question for Stefan, actually. How do you see progress towards data integration and collection? Because I totally agree with your point that we need integration in the 4 sectors you mentioned, but it's hard enough to collect data in one sector. So how do you see we can help, or the coalition can help in this regard?
Yeah, excellent question. This is really the elephant. Yes, I'm not doing very well with this microphone either. Thank you, Sophie, very much for that. I think that, part of doing this analysis is also pointing to the data gaps. I think that it really depends on the countries. I think perhaps Don mentioned this with OECD. Perhaps actually there's a role for OECD for showing things. I'll just comment on the kinds of information we use and also clear data gaps. I think that what I see is that there's a potential, and we use a lot of information systems. That's particularly for education. And I have a health hat, so I also use health information systems in other works I do in health. I think there's an opportunity here for data strengthening. I fully believe in that, and in particular in the context of education. Now, the quality of the data really depends on how strong that data collection is, and so on, and that varies by country to country. I think, and my friend Robert here can comment at length about this, there's an enormous gap in health. I mean, basically it seems like life stops at age 5. And from age 5, and I'm surprised because I did go through that period from age 5 to age 15, and I did change my health indicators as well. There's actually really very little information, and And I know Don can talk at length about this as well, as he was very much involved in pioneering work around this. So I think we need to do a massive effort there. In fact, actually, Diane was alluding to this. Then the agriculture, I think, is very interesting. And then I'll comment on social protection briefly. But agriculture is very interesting because it becomes very idiosyncratic. It deals with, you know, sort of organization about the locality of the food, right? What you can produce, but also a sort of like social arrangements. In some places, there's unions, right? With like, and so on. So then I think that that one is perhaps less of a systematic, you know, way like the education system that I was saying. And I think that, you know, the social protection is, I think we have to think more programmatic in some ways. So yeah, it's just a few entry points. I'll stop there, but I'm sure others can comment on that.
So thank you very much, and thanks for the short answers. Short answers are good at this point. We have a specific question here for you, Evan, and the question is, in the French context, what do you mean by sustainable and quality food? Sustainable and quality food. Thanks.
It's actually an excellent question. We define a list of public labels, like organic, all the signs of origin. Yeah, okay. So yeah, we defined a list of different public labels and certifications, which were considered to be either sustainable and or quality. So it can be organic food. We have a public label which is called high environmental quality. We also have a public label for fisheries. And also all the quality labels related to the origin or the quality, and we include all that in these criterias. And we also have more large criterias that can be used related to the environmental externalities of food products that is chosen on public markets. So it can be either, yeah, on the list or a more open criteria if there are externalities, positive environmental externalities.
Great, thank you very much for that. It's really what some people call healthy food, right? I'm using a common shorthand. I'm going to come to you, Noam, but we've actually got a live question from Bent Mikkelsen in Denmark. Bent, if you'd like to speak. I'm hoping this is going to work.
Okay.
Yep. Carry on, Bent.
Yes. Okay. Thanks very much for interesting presentation. My question in the chat is related to. I completely agree on the necessity, the importance of the evidence and the hard data. And speaking about the nutritional impacts, the nutritional benefits, it's quite convincing, I should say. My question relates to the co-benefits that was raised. One of the things that were raised, the co-benefits for the local society. The fact that local farmers, local food producers, local people in general around the school can benefit from school meal programs. How would you assess, could you elaborate a bit on what is the strength of the evidence? Do we know something, or do we just speculate, or do we think that it is so, or are there any hard facts, for example, from the OECD? That's my question.
Well, I'm not sure the French situation is the most representative of all the situations here, but we have developed in France what we call the territorial food projects, in which it's often led by a municipality or a group of municipalities, and their goal is to first establish a diagnosis to see all the challenges related to food and agriculture, and then find solutions inside the territory to answer these challenges. And often the school meals is one of the challenge, and transition to agroecological way of producing food is also a challenge, and there is always a link between these two. So we are now developing a database for all these territorial food projects. We have like 430 in the territory right now, to assess the efficiency of this scale, to create really local environment and incentivize the transition for farmers.
Great. Thank you for taking that question, Evan. That's very helpful. I see another question now from Noam Angrist, who on the education analysis group.
Yeah. Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Yes, Noam Angrist, and I'm an education researcher and co-chair of the community of practice with Stefan. So, you know what, in a recent review that we did of education interventions, over half didn't work at all. And so I think there's a real openness in the education research community for health interventions that can improve education outcomes, which is great. And school meals can be exactly one of those. I think looking at opportunities to co-evaluate a school meals intervention with an educational program would be particularly exciting to some of these points around multi-sectoral benefits, et cetera. So actually a question for everyone, but maybe McGovern-Dole, which to my knowledge is one of the large few efforts that does combine actually education and school meals intervention, is there something in the pipeline? I know we were chatting about this briefly, to look at that. Maybe IDB has something in the pipeline that they want to share. Are there opportunities to do and maybe to Ben's point, kind of a big impact evaluation, really quantifying a lot of these connections?
So I would say McGovern-Dole tends to be more one-off, and it's what ends up being proposed in the application. There are some examples, like in Timor-Leste recently, there was a review of the ration and different forms of the ration and how it affected educational outcomes, among other things. And based on those findings, the ration was just adjusted a week ago, like formally. So you'll see things like that, but I would say that it's exceptional to see something like that. I would like to see more of it. And how to get involved in that as a researcher, I would say try to partner up with an applicant. And we really do have a small pool of applicants. There are maybe 10 different civil society organizations plus the World Food Program that apply from year to year, and speak with them and try to become a sub-recipient on an application and propose something like that during the application phase. And we have an example that I like to think about is in Cameroon, the University of Illinois is researching video training for education, among other things, including health extension worker training in the community, and determining whether that's an effective way to train. And it seems to be working very well. I would consider that implementation science, but it's an example of where a research institution partnered up with a civil society organization. And I would like to see more of that. So we could talk more about that later too, if you want. So thank you.
That's great. And I just want to point out that McGovern-Dole is about 70% of all ODA for school meals. It is extraordinary. I think now we can have another 5 minutes. My bosses tell me, so that sounds good. Maybe Grania, I could ask you to have a word.
Hi everyone. My name is Grania. I'm working at the OECD in the child wellbeing unit. So we look at how to measure child wellbeing, develop indicators, but also issues around developing coordinated policies to promote children's wellbeing and their families too. So right now with the European Child Guarantee, which everyone knows, like one of the aims of it is that every child or that's at risk of poverty or social disadvantage has access to a healthy school meal. So we're working with countries on how they're going to achieve that and how they're going to monitor that too. So the discussion on it's because school meals are an education and a health intervention, and my understanding is to understand the education impact of school meals can be more of an assumption, but bringing into the spotlight the health impact and what are people's ideas and what sort of measures are very important about the health impacts of school meals, especially for kids that are disadvantaged.
Great question, Grania. Can I sort of, hot off the press breaking news is that the coalition has been asked to participate in the European Child Guarantee discussions going forward. So this is the sign of the way in which, and specifically the Research Consortium. So it's great you raised that. I think that's the kind of policy learning that we could really share more and understand better. So I'm going to turn to Robert.
Yeah, thank you very much. In fact, I wanted to comment on the Diane presentation first. I don't know why we waited for so long for COVID to come for the Research Consortium to be established before we realized that we need indicators to assess nutrition for school-age children and adolescents. Because when you were making your presentation, clearly I was like, why are you using these indicators? And you accepted, you kind of acknowledge the fact that, minimum acceptable diet is not the indicators for measuring this age group. And so I just said, well, you already know the gap here. And so it's, because for this age group, because of the variation of the age from 5 to 19 years, definitely BMI for age is not the best indicator for measuring all these the age group for that age group. So I think this is why we want us to all put our heads together to get the indicators developed. And the Research Consortium will do it. We have already started the process. I don't know if you know about the Bond Kit project. So that's the starting point, and we are going to do that. And the Research Consortium is leading that process. I have a question.
I'm afraid we're going to have to move on at this point, Robert. I'm so sorry. No, I'm sorry. We don't have time for a quick question. So can I just remind you that Diane was part of the initiation of the Bond Kit?
Okay, great. All right, thank you.
Credit where credit is due. Okay, I think at this point I have to say thank you to those three speakers and hand back to Celine.
So we are discussing, and obviously we would like to discuss more, and we can do it today, but let's continue. I want first to thank all of you here in the room and online, and a special thank to Sylvie and Stefan, because we've been working together trying to organize this session on the side of the School Meals Coalition, and we saw that it was great to bring everyone here in the OECD in Paris, as the School Meal Coalition was taking place in Paris, and we are a kind of knowledge partner to the coalition. So thanks very much to everyone.
Thank you to you.
And to my colleagues behind who've done the hard work. So this event, we planned it as an opportunity for dialogue between the policymaking community and the research community. And at the OECD, we're calling for better policies for food systems to address the triple challenge, and we're calling for evidence-based policies. So we are really very much into this research of indicators, comparable information, and it was very interesting to work with the community of practice on good practices to see that countries are struggling putting together these indicators, and we've seen that France is coming up with new tools, in the US as well. So I think it's ongoing work, and we need to continue this conversation, and we can help here that conversation at the OECD. Well, a few topics, that were identified today where we need more research on, I think, is this question of school meals as social protection. So how can we improve participation rates? Even in countries with universal free meals, sometimes kids don't go. We need work on the nutrition aspects, and we know that some researchers are doing great work on this question of vegetalizing diets. We need more information on the sustainability of school meals. And obviously, we're interested in these livelihood aspects. You know, how can school meals be a lever for transformation of food systems? Well, that being said, we'll make all the presentations that we've heard today available on the OECD website. The recording will also be available. And well, I just want to encourage all our OECD and partner countries to, well, join the coalition if it's not already done, and the communities of practices. Well, we have facilitated here at the OECD the development of the case studies on best practices for the US and Japan. I'll be happy to help other countries. If you're online, we can work together. And I want to thank everyone for this event. Thank you very much.
And sorry, I do think I would like to thank Julia for hosting this, and Celine and the team for making this a fantastic opportunity for us all, and of course bless Sylvie for making it happen from our side. Thank you very much.